The silence of royal halls has always carried secrets, but some whispers are so heavy they rattle the very foundation of monarchy. What if the world's most beloved prince, the one once called Despair, suddenly stepped forward to confirm a rumor so explosive it threatens to dismantle everything the public thought they knew about his marriage, his children, and even his sense of truth? Imagine Prince Harry, with his life already an open book through interviews, documentaries, and memoirs, choosing now to reveal a secret he had buried beneath layers of loyalty and love. His voice trembles not because of fear, but because he knows the truth he's about to confess will change everything. It's a revelation tied not to politics, not to money, but to something far more personal and fragile, his children's very beginnings. And it begins with a statement that shatters the illusion carefully built around the Sussex brand. For years, rumors circled like hawks in the sky. Questions about Archie's birth had never truly faded, despite palace announcements and staged photographs. Why had Meghan not been seen with a growing bump in public the way other royal women had? Why were the birth details so oddly secretive, even for a family famed for its obsession with privacy? And when Lilibet came along, thousands of miles away from the polished balconies of Buckingham Palace, why did the announcement feel even more guarded? Journalists speculated, commentators whispered, and royal biographers carefully hinted. Yet the truth always remained out of reach, until now. Because according to Harry himself, Archie and Lilibet were not carried by Meghan Markle at all. They were born via surrogacy. And even more shocking, Meghan allegedly could not have carried them even if she wanted to, because she lost her womb at the age of 18. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This introduction alone stops the world in its tracks, but the story isn't just about the mechanics of birth. It is about the destruction of trust, the weight of lies, and the unbearable cost of secrecy. If you followed Harry's journey, you know this is not a man who speaks lightly. He is impulsive, yes, but rarely reckless without reason. Every word he utters carries scars of childhood loss, media harassment, and the desperate attempt to build something better than what he endured. But why, after all these years, did he decide to speak now? What broke inside of him that made him lay bare a truth so painful it may never be forgiven? To understand, you have to step back into the long history of royal motherhood. Diana, William, Kate, all of them paraded before cameras, their swollen bellies a public promise of continuity. The world watched them wave outside hospitals, newborns bundled in their arms, proof that the monarchy was alive and stable. Harry grew up under that shadow. He knew how much heirs mattered, not just for tradition, but for national pride. So when Meghan came into his life, there was no escaping that expectation. She had to produce children, and quickly. The public demanded it, the palace expected it, and the media speculated endlessly on it. But if Meghan had indeed lost her womb as a teenager, then from the very start, the royal fairy tale was built on a foundation of silence and deception. In the middle of this story lies Meghan herself, a woman always skilled in performance. She knew how to present vulnerability on cue, charm on command, and secrecy in ways that left people guessing. For a time, it worked. People embraced her as the fresh, modern duchess. But behind the polished magazine covers, questions mounted. Why were there no candid photos of her pregnancies that matched reality? Why did details about the birth shift or clash? The palace remained silent, thinking perhaps silence would smother speculation. Instead, silence gave birth to suspicion. And what of Harry? Here is a man caught between love and legacy, who chose to protect his wife's dignity over the world's curiosity. For years he fought tooth and nail to shield Meghan from scrutiny, branding any criticism as racism, sexism, or cruelty. Perhaps he believed, truly believed, that love could cover all truths. But time wears down even the strongest defenses. Behind closed doors, the pressure of lies builds like steam in a kettle. Each whispered question from journalists, each side eye from insiders, chipped away at Harry's resolve. The truth wasn't just circling him anymore, it was suffocating him. When he finally revealed it, he didn't do it with triumphant arrogance. No, this wasn't a man gloating about exposing someone else's lie. He did it with a weariness that suggested confession was his only path to freedom. Because what Harry revealed wasn't just about Meghan. It was about himself, his children, and the betrayal of trust that turned his love story into a cautionary tale. He admitted that Archie and Lilibet, while loved deeply, were not born of Meghan's womb, that their entry into this world came through women the public never met, women whose names may never be known. He admitted Meghan could never have been pregnant, not since that fateful operation when she was only 18 years old. And suddenly, the whispers that seemed like cruelty from tabloids turned into echoes of truth, spoken not by strangers, but by Harry himself. But this revelation does more than satisfy curiosity. It cuts straight into the myth Meghan and Harry so carefully constructed. Their brand has always been built on authenticity, our truth, as Meghan once boldly put it. Yet if the very foundation of their family is based on secrecy, then what else have they hidden? What else has been carefully packaged for cameras while being completely false behind closed doors? It's a question not just about Meghan's body, but about trust, love, and the power dynamics that shape marriages. Was Harry complicit in protecting the lie for too long, or was he a victim of it himself, held hostage by fear of exposure? The ending of this introduction doesn't resolve those questions, it raises them. Because now the world must confront a shocking paradox. Harry may have spoken his truth, but in doing so, he has destroyed the illusion of the fairy tale he once begged us all to believe. The audience watching this story unfold is left unsettled, grappling with conflicting emotions. Sympathy for Harry, anger at Meghan, worry for the children, suspicion toward the monarchy, and even a sense of betrayal as fans who invested in their story feel duped. And so, this story begins not with answers, but with raw, aching questions. How does a marriage survive when the foundation cracks? How do children grow up knowing their lives began under layers of secrecy? And how does a royal, once adored, find redemption when his truth burns down the very house he built? That is the journey you are about to take. By the end, you will see the fallout, the heartbreak, and perhaps even the twisted relief that comes when the truth, however painful, finally steps into the light. The beginning of every great scandal is not an announcement, but a whisper. For Harry and Meghan, those whispers started almost as soon as they became engaged. At first, it was excitement and celebration, the fairy tale romance between the rebellious prince and the Hollywood actress. The press couldn't get enough of it. Headlines were filled with glowing predictions of a modern monarchy, a fresh new image, and a couple who would represent diversity and change. But beneath the glittering praise, there was a current of skepticism, a question that refused to go away. Could Meghan truly fit into the most traditional and scrutinized family on earth? It was not just her background or her career that drew speculation. It was her future role as a mother. In the royal family, motherhood is not simply personal, it is national. Every pregnancy carries the weight of history, the survival of a dynasty, and the expectations of millions. Diana's bump with William was not just a baby bump, it was the future of the crown. Kate Middleton's hospital steps appearances after each of her children were born were not private moments. They were staged national reassurances that the monarchy was alive and strong. Against that backdrop, Meghan's story was always going to be different. The whispers about her ability to carry children began before she ever announced a pregnancy. Some of these whispers were cruel gossip, others rooted in fragments of truth. In Los Angeles, long before Meghan's royal life, there were rumors that she had undergone a major surgery as a teenager, a procedure that left her unable to conceive. Few took them seriously when she entered the spotlight, but once she married into royalty, every rumor found new oxygen. Reporters asked subtle questions, paparazzi studied her figure, and commentators debated whether her age and past health would allow her to give Harry the children he so desperately wanted. When Meghan appeared in public during what was claimed to be her first pregnancy, the speculation only grew louder. Unlike Diana or Kate, who appeared in countless candid photographs during their pregnancies, Meghan's public appearances were fewer, shorter, and carefully staged. Observers noticed inconsistencies, bumps that appeared larger one day and smaller the next, clothing choices that seemed designed to conceal more than reveal. For fans who adored her, it was all perfectly normal. Every woman carries differently, after all. But for skeptics, each appearance added fuel to the fire. Could it be, they asked, that Meghan wasn't carrying a child at all? The palace tried its usual strategy: silence. Silence had worked for centuries in the face of scandal. Do not dignify rumors with an answer, the royal mantra goes, and eventually the public will tire of them. But this time, silence only fed suspicion. Tabloids ran headlines questioning Meghan's pregnancy photos, side-by-side comparisons with other royals. Social media became a breeding ground for theories, some far-fetched, some chillingly plausible. Even small details, like Meghan's unusual decision to avoid the traditional hospital photo on the steps, became ammunition. People asked, why the secrecy? Why hide what every other royal proudly displayed? In truth, whispers became louder because they were never addressed. When Archie was born, the palace released almost no details. The birth certificate came late. The announcement felt oddly detached, lacking the joy usually surrounding a royal birth. Then came the staged photo with Meghan and Harry, cradling Archie in Windsor Castle. To the average viewer, it was a sweet family moment. But to critics, it felt rehearsed, almost artificial, as if it was hiding something. Why? They asked. Was there no candidness? Why did Meghan look more like a woman posing for a photo shoot than a mother recovering from childbirth? And so, the first great whisper was born. Meghan had not given birth to Archie herself. Perhaps she had used a surrogate. Perhaps she had faked a pregnancy to satisfy expectations. Perhaps, some claimed, the baby wasn't even biologically hers. The theories ranged from the cruel to the absurd, but they shared one thing in common. They refused to disappear. Each time the palace ignored them, they grew stronger. Each time Meghan and Harry scolded the press for intrusion, people asked what they were hiding. Behind closed doors, Harry must have felt the weight of it pressing in. He knew the truth, and he knew the rumors weren't just baseless chatter. They were uncomfortably close to reality. To admit it would destroy Meghan's carefully curated image as a groundbreaking royal mother. To deny it outright risked a scandal if the truth ever leaked. So he chose silence too. But silence for a prince is not peace, it is torment. As months turned into years, the whispers began to harden into belief. When Lilibet was announced, far away from the eyes of Britain, people immediately questioned whether Meghan was truly pregnant again. She had retreated even further from public view, and when the baby was introduced, there was no hospital photo, no royal tradition, just a carefully staged announcement. The cycle repeated itself: adoration from fans, suspicion from skeptics, silence from the palace. And in the vacuum of answers, the rumor of surrogacy became impossible to ignore. What made these whispers so dangerous was not just their persistence, but their plausibility. Royals live under the harshest spotlight in the world, and every detail is dissected. When details are missing, the absence itself becomes a clue. Meghan's pregnancy stories were full of gaps, and gaps invite speculation. In a world of 24-hour news cycles and internet sleuths, secrets can't stay buried forever. This chapter sets the stage for why Harry's bombshell is so devastating. The whispers had been there all along, circling like vultures. Everyone heard them, everyone questioned them, but no one truly believed Harry would ever confirm them. Yet by choosing to speak, he didn't just validate years of speculation. He turned whispers into thunder. He forced the world to look back at those moments. Archie's birth, Lilibet's announcement, Meghan's mysterious bumps, and ask whether they had been watching a performance all along. The first chapter of this story doesn't answer all the questions, but it does reveal the environment of suspicion that made Harry's confession both inevitable and explosive. It shows how whispers, ignored for too long, become storms that cannot be silenced. And it leaves us wondering, if these whispers were true, how many more are waiting to be spoken aloud? Every fairy tale has a backstory, and Meghan's was no exception. To the public, she was the bright, confident actress who had stepped into the spotlight as Harry's savior, the woman who brought warmth and modernity to a monarchy stiffened by centuries of protocol. But behind the glossy magazine spreads and carefully crafted interviews, there was a history most people knew little about. And it was this history that would one day become the foundation for the most explosive revelation of all. As a teenager in Los Angeles, Meghan was like many ambitious young women, driven, sharp, and hungry for a bigger stage. But according to whispers from people who claimed to know her past, Meghan faced a devastating health crisis that changed her life forever. At just 18, She allegedly underwent a serious medical procedure that resulted in the loss of her womb. For any young woman, such an event would be life-shattering, a silent grief that reshapes identity and dreams. For Meghan, who would later marry into a family obsessed with heirs, it was an unspoken wound that could never fully heal. The story of this surgery was never widely told. Meghan herself never acknowledged it publicly, nor did her family. Yet fragments of it floated in conversations among those who had been close to her before her fame. In Hollywood circles, people whispered about her health struggles, noting her secrecy around questions of children. It was easy to dismiss as idle talk back then, when Meghan was still a rising actress trying to make her mark on Suits. But once she was married to Harry, those same whispers carried new weight. If true, they meant Meghan could never fulfill the most traditional role expected of a royal wife, bearing children. For years, she guarded this secret fiercely. She was not the first woman to face infertility, nor the first to turn to alternative paths to motherhood. But in the royal family, where pregnancy and birth are public rituals tied to national identity, the idea of surrogacy or adoption was unthinkable. Meghan knew that admitting her condition would fuel not just sympathy, but scandal. It would provide critics with ammunition to claim she was unfit for her role. And so, she kept it buried. What makes this chapter of Meghan's story so haunting is not just the alleged medical truth, but the way it shaped her decisions later on. When she entered the royal family, she crafted an image of strength and independence, but also vulnerability. She shared stories of her struggles with mental health, her loneliness, her battles with the press. Yet she never spoke of the one thing that could explain so much of the secrecy around her pregnancies. To admit she had no womb would strip her of the maternal image she needed to project. So instead, she leaned into performance. Observers later pointed out the inconsistencies. Meghan, who once spoke openly about every detail of her life in interviews, grew remarkably vague whenever the topic turned to her pregnancies. Unlike Kate, she never revealed due dates, never shared candid moments of baby preparation, never appeared genuinely at ease with the idea of carrying children. Instead, she appeared calculated, controlling the narrative with an iron grip. To her supporters, this was simply a woman demanding privacy. To her critics, it was evidence that there was something to hide. Harry, too, seemed caught in the storm. For a man who had grown up under the shadow of his mother, who had watched Diana turn her pregnancies into national events, Harry's approach with Meghan was strikingly different. He shielded her, kept her out of view, and attacked the press for questioning her. But in doing so, he only added fuel to the fire. People wondered why he was so defensive, why he refused to follow the traditions his brother had so gracefully accepted. Was it love, or was it fear of exposure? The truth about Meghan's alleged surgery at 18 became the silent root of all this secrecy. It explained why she might have turned to surrogacy, why her pregnancies felt staged, and why Harry eventually broke under the pressure of keeping such a colossal secret. But for years, it remained just that, an unconfirmed, whispered fragment of her past. And yet, those who knew her before her royal life insisted there was more to the story. Friends from her youth described her as ambitious but guarded. She confided in very few, and when she did, it was always with caution. She learned early how to control information, how to shape narratives, and how to keep parts of herself hidden. Perhaps losing her womb at such a young age taught her the value of secrecy, the necessity of controlling what people believed. Perhaps it was this very lesson that later enabled her to step into the royal world and hold her ground against the most powerful institution in Britain. Still, secrets have a way of resurfacing. When Harry finally revealed the truth about their children's births, the story of Meghan's hidden past gained new clarity. Suddenly, the whispers about her teenage surgery no longer seemed like cruel gossip. They seemed like the missing piece of a puzzle that had confused the world for years. People looked back at Meghan's life with fresh eyes, re-examining old interviews, old photos, old anecdotes, searching for signs they had missed. And the more they looked, the more they saw. The tragedy of Meghan's hidden past is that it could have inspired sympathy and understanding. If she had spoken openly about her struggles, she might have won over even her harshest critics. People respect vulnerability, they respect honesty, and many women around the world could have related to her story. But instead, by hiding it, She turned it into a weapon that could one day be used against her. And when Harry finally spoke, that weapon was unleashed. This chapter leaves us with an unsettling thought. How much of Meghan's story was shaped by this one event at 18? Did it fuel her hunger for control, her need to craft an image, her fear of exposure? And if Harry knew all along, how long could any marriage survive under the weight of such a secret? From the very beginning, Harry and Meghan's marriage was not simply a union of two people. It was a collision between worlds. On one side stood Harry, a prince raised in the traditions of the monarchy, scarred by its harsh spotlight, yet bound to its rituals. On the other stood Meghan, a woman of ambition and independence, someone who had built her identity in Hollywood, where reinvention is both survival and art. The chemistry between them was undeniable, but so was the tension. What began as a love story quickly transformed into one of the most scrutinized marriages in modern history, and underneath it all lay questions that went far deeper than press coverage or public approval. The early days of their relationship carried the charm of romance against the odds. Harry, the bachelor prince often portrayed as reckless, had found in Meghan a woman who seemed to ground him. She was confident, articulate, and unlike anyone the royal family had ever embraced. Their engagement was celebrated with fanfare, with Harry declaring he had found someone who not only understood him, but also shared his vision of a modern, compassionate world. Meghan herself basked in the glow of newfound royalty, stepping out in designer dresses, her every move watched by cameras that adored her. But behind the smiles and glowing headlines, there were cracks forming. The monarchy is not just a family, it is an institution. It thrives on continuity, predictability, and tradition. Meghan, with her Hollywood instincts, was built for reinvention, for control of narrative, for image-making. Almost immediately, she clashed with the rigid structures around her. Staff members spoke of tension, of Meghan demanding things her way, of a duchess unwilling to play by rules written long before her arrival. And while this made her admirers cheer her independence, within palace walls it caused unrest. One of the greatest sources of strain was the issue of children. For centuries, royal marriages have been measured by their ability to produce heirs. The line of succession is not just symbolic, it is the backbone of monarchy. Diana produced William and Harry, ensuring the continuation of the crown. Kate produced George, Charlotte, and Louis, cementing the future of the monarchy in plain sight. Meghan was expected to follow the same path. Yet for Meghan, this expectation carried a shadow few knew about. The whispers of her teenage surgery, the alleged loss of her womb, meant that fulfilling this expectation was impossible. Still, appearances had to be maintained. Harry, deeply in love and fiercely protective, threw himself into the role of defender. He bristled at the press, lashing out at critics, insisting that Meghan was treated unfairly compared to his sister-in-law Kate. Every negative story was labeled as racism, sexism, or cruelty. While those accusations were not without truth, they also became convenient shields against deeper questions. Why did Meghan avoid traditions surrounding royal pregnancies? Why did the palace announce Archie's birth with unusual secrecy? Why was Meghan's bump the subject of so much speculation? Harry silenced these questions with fury, but fury cannot erase doubt, it only deepens it. Inside the marriage, the pressure mounted. Meghan wanted control over how their lives were presented. Harry wanted to protect her from the fate his mother had suffered. The result was a partnership forged in both love and paranoia, with secrecy becoming their shared language. Every public appearance was calculated, every photograph scrutinized before release. Their lives became less about living and more about defending, and as the defenses grew higher, so too did the suspicion from the outside world. It was during this period that the fairy tale image of their marriage began to fracture. Stories of arguments surfaced, of Meghan clashing with staff, of Harry withdrawing from his brother William. The press coined the term Fab Four when Meghan and Harry appeared alongside William and Kate, but behind closed doors, tensions ran deep. The brothers who had once been inseparable were now at odds. William, rooted in tradition, grew wary of Meghan's influence. Kate, who had endured years of press scrutiny with quiet grace, looked on with suspicion as Meghan and Harry painted themselves as victims at every turn. And yet, for Harry, the marriage remained a sanctuary. He clung to Meghan with a loyalty that shocked even those closest to him. Friends spoke of how he cut ties with longtime companions who questioned her. Family members noticed how he shifted his priorities, putting Meghan above all else. For a time, this devotion insulated them from the storm. But marriage built on secrecy is fragile. Every lie, every hidden truth, chips away at the foundation. The issue of children became the breaking point of trust. When Archie was born, the secrecy surrounding his arrival raised more questions than answers. Harry defended Meghan with passion, but in private he wrestled with his conscience. Was protecting her worth the deception? Could he endure a lifetime of whispers about his children's origins? Meghan urged him to stay silent, reminding him of the cruelty of the press, the dangers of exposure. But silence for Harry was suffocating, the very thing he despised about royal life. Its obsession with image over truth had become the cornerstone of his own marriage. As the years passed, the pressure of carrying this secret seeped into every corner of their relationship. Publicly, they smiled, held hands, and projected unity. Privately, arguments erupted. Harry's sense of honesty clashed with Meghan's insistence on control. He had been raised to believe that lies destroy families. Meghan had been shaped to believe that appearances sustain survival. The clash was inevitable. And so, their marriage, which had begun as a story of love conquering tradition, became a battlefield of truth versus image. The world watched them retreat to California, claiming they were seeking freedom. But freedom from the monarchy did not mean freedom from the secret they carried. The surrogacy rumors followed them across the Atlantic, louder than ever. Each public denial rang hollow. Each staged photo fed the speculation. And in the heart of it all was Harry, torn between loyalty to his wife and loyalty to the truth he could no longer silence. This chapter of their story is not just about romance under fire. It is about the crushing weight of expectation, the suffocating power of lies, and the slow erosion of a marriage caught between love and legacy. It leaves us asking the question, how long can a marriage survive when the very truth of a family's foundation is hidden from the world? Every royal birth is a spectacle. For centuries, the arrival of an heir has been treated not as a private family moment, but as a public ritual. The image of a new mother, exhausted yet glowing, stepping onto the steps of a hospital with her newborn swaddled in a blanket, is as much a part of the royal brand as crowns and palaces. Diana gave the world those images with William and Harry. Kate Middleton continued the tradition with George, Charlotte, and Louis, smiling for cameras only hours after giving birth. These moments reassure the public that the monarchy is alive, strong, and enduring. But when Meghan Markle and Prince Harry welcomed Archie into the world, that ritual was broken. And in the silence left by tradition's absence, a storm of suspicion was born. From the very beginning, details surrounding Archie's birth were cloaked in secrecy. The palace issued vague statements that left more questions than answers. Where had Meghan delivered? Why was there no immediate hospital photo? Why did the announcement feel delayed and oddly scripted? For royal watchers, it was unprecedented. Never before had a royal birth been so shrouded in mystery. What should have been a moment of joy felt strangely clinical, almost staged, as if the palace were managing a crisis rather than celebrating a child. One of the earliest signs that something was unusual came with the official timeline. The announcement that Meghan had gone into labor was followed only hours later by confirmation that Archie had already been born. The contradictory nature of the updates left reporters baffled. Had the palace deliberately misled the public, or were they scrambling to cover a narrative they couldn't fully control? For many, it felt less like an oversight and more like a deliberate manipulation. When Meghan and Harry finally presented Archie to the world, it wasn't on the hospital steps, surrounded by cheering crowds and flashing cameras. Instead, it was inside Windsor Castle, in a carefully staged photo shoot. Meghan stood in a pristine white dress, hair perfectly styled, looking more like a woman on a magazine cover than a mother recovering from childbirth. Harry beamed, proud but stiff, his words rehearsed. To fans, it was a sweet introduction to a new family. But to critics, it was a performance. Where was the exhaustion, the rawness, the authenticity of a woman who had just endured labor? Where were the hospital staff, the proud grandparents, the sense of spontaneity that usually accompanies such moments? The entire scene felt too polished, too controlled. Adding to the confusion was Meghan's physical appearance. Some observers noted that she looked remarkably slim and composed, without the physical signs expected after giving birth. Others pointed out the oddity of her attire, as if the dress had been chosen not for comfort but for optics. The result was an image that felt detached from reality. The more polished Meghan appeared, the more the whispers grew. Could it be that she had never carried Archie at all? Documents only deepened the mystery. Archie's birth certificate, released later than usual, listed Portland Hospital in London as the place of birth. But Meghan and Harry's behavior during those days didn't align with the certificate. Neighbors near Frogmore Cottage reported seeing little movement, no signs of hospital runs, no frantic activity typical of a royal birth. To this day, discrepancies in the timeline remain unexplained. For the public, these inconsistencies became the fuel for endless speculation. Was Meghan's pregnancy faked? Did she use a surrogate but present herself as the birth mother? Was the secrecy an attempt to hide the truth, or simply a misguided effort at privacy? Each theory had its believers, and in the absence of transparency, every theory carried weight. Inside the royal family, Archie's birth caused unease. William and Kate had followed tradition to the letter, offering the public every detail expected of them. Meghan and Harry's decision to break from that script felt like defiance. But more than that, it raised suspicion even within palace walls. If everything was normal, why the extraordinary effort to conceal it? Why the refusal to honor traditions that had never been questioned before? Harry's role in all this was telling. Normally jovial and candid, he appeared defensive, even irritable, whenever Archie's birth was discussed. In interviews, he deflected questions with awkward jokes or curt replies. Rather than easing public curiosity, his demeanor only heightened it. A man at peace with the truth does not bristle at simple inquiries. A man guarding a secret does. And Harry, for all his smiles, looked like a man under immense strain. The secrecy didn't end with Archie's arrival. As the months went on, Meghan and Harry remained intensely protective, releasing only carefully curated photographs. Unlike William and Kate, who shared occasional candid images of their children, the Sussexes chose to reveal Archie in controlled environments, official portraits, staged charity events, and glossy magazine-style photos. Each release felt more like a brand promotion than a family moment, reinforcing the sense that this was not natural parenthood but a managed image. The whispers turned into headlines, and the headlines into worldwide speculation. The phrase "moon bump" trended online, referencing claims that Meghan had worn a prosthetic belly during her public appearances. Video clips circulated of her bump appearing to shift unnaturally as she bent down. While some dismissed these theories as cruel or absurd, others pointed out that the secrecy surrounding Archie's birth made them difficult to disprove. In a world where royal traditions demand openness, Meghan and Harry's insistence on control backfired spectacularly. And yet, through it all, Harry and Meghan remained silent. They never directly addressed the rumors, never offered clarity. Instead, they framed the press coverage as bullying, as harassment driven by racism and misogyny. While those accusations held merit in certain cases, they also served as shields against deeper questions. For critics, it was a deflection. For supporters, it was a rallying cry. For the rest of the world, it was a mystery that refused to die. What made Archie's birth so significant was not just the secrecy, but the precedent it set. If Meghan and Harry were willing to break tradition so drastically for their firstborn, what would they do for their second child? And if the rumors were true, that Archie was born via surrogacy but presented as Meghan's child, then every photograph, every statement, every smile was built on a lie. This chapter reveals why Harry's later confession carried such devastating weight. The mystery of Archie's birth was never fully resolved, leaving the world to speculate for years. By finally admitting the truth, Harry didn't just validate the whispers. He rewrote the story of Archie's very existence. What the public once suspected, Harry himself had confirmed. And that confirmation turned Archie's birth from a mystery into a scandal, one that will echo for generations. If Archie's birth had raised eyebrows, the arrival of Harry and Meghan's second child sent suspicion into overdrive. Lilibet Diana, named after both the Queen and Harry's late mother, was meant to symbolize reconciliation, continuity, and love. Yet from the very moment her birth was announced, it felt as though the same veil of secrecy that clouded Archie's arrival had been pulled even tighter. Instead of silencing doubts, it magnified them. The announcement itself was unusual. A brief statement revealed that Meghan had delivered a healthy baby girl in California. The birth was said to have taken place at Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, away from the pomp and tradition of London. To their supporters, this was a touching act of independence, proof that Harry and Meghan had cut ties with the monarchy and chosen to live life on their own terms. To skeptics, it was a carefully calculated move. By having the birth overseas, they had placed themselves beyond the reach of British press scrutiny and royal protocols. The timing of the announcement was equally curious. The statement came days after the supposed delivery, raising questions about why the news had been delayed. In a world where royal births are usually broadcast within hours, this delay suggested control and calculation. Was it about privacy, or was there more to hide? The fact that no hospital staff came forward, no photos surfaced, and no independent confirmations were made only deepened the mystery. Once again, Meghan's physical absence from the public eye during her pregnancy fed speculation. Unlike Kate, who had been photographed countless times while carrying her children, Meghan's appearances were rare, carefully staged, and often cloaked in loose clothing. Those who studied her bump in photographs noted inconsistencies, echoing the same suspicions that had plagued Archie's birth. Some claimed her bump appeared unusually high in one image and lower in another. Others pointed to the fluidity of its shape, suggesting it did not behave like a natural pregnancy belly. Whether these were genuine observations or simply the byproduct of public obsession, the secrecy surrounding the pregnancy ensured that speculation thrived. When Lilibet was finally introduced, it was through a staged photograph released months after her birth. The picture showed a smiling family, perfectly posed in a sunlit California garden. Meghan, radiant, held her daughter like a trophy of maternal triumph. But once again, there were no candid hospital shots, no spontaneous moments, nothing to confirm the authenticity of the birth narrative. For royal watchers accustomed to Tra. What made Lilibet's birth even more controversial was the name. By choosing Lilibet, Meghan and Harry were invoking the Queen's most intimate nickname, one used only by her closest family members. To some, it was a gesture of love and respect. To others, it was an audacious attempt to bind the child forever to the monarchy, even as Harry and Meghan publicly distanced themselves from it. Critics argued that the name was chosen strategically as a shield against criticism. After all, who would dare question the authenticity of a child so intimately tied to the Queen's legacy? The Queen's reaction was another source of intrigue. Reports claimed she had been informed before the announcement, but insiders suggested she was caught off guard. Some said she was touched, others that she was uneasy. The ambiguity only fed speculation. If the Queen herself had doubts about Lilibet's birth, what did that say about the story Meghan and Harry were presenting to the world? In California, the secrecy was ironclad. Hospital staff remained silent, bound by strict privacy rules. Neighbors in Montecito reported little activity during the time Meghan was supposedly in labor. No ambulances were seen, no movements typical of a birth were noticed. And while many dismissed these details as irrelevant, to those already suspicious, they became crucial pieces of evidence. The question that haunted Archie's birth resurfaced with even greater intensity. Was Lilibet truly carried by Meghan, or was she another child born through surrogacy? For Harry, the pressure mounted. As with Archie, he tried to deflect questions, smiling through interviews and insisting on privacy. But the cracks in his facade were visible. His defensiveness, his quick temper, his refusal to follow royal traditions. All of it betrayed a man struggling to balance love with truth. Meghan, meanwhile, leaned into control, carefully curating their image through interviews and media deals. When she spoke of her children, her words were warm but vague, never offering details that might be scrutinized. To some, this was natural. To others, it was the language of someone guarding a secret too heavy to reveal. The story of Lilibet's birth is not just about one child. It is about the pattern it revealed. Twice, Meghan had avoided traditions that every royal mother before her had embraced. Twice, Harry had appeared defensive, secretive, and strained. Twice, the public had been given polished images instead of authentic glimpses. And twice, Whispers of surrogacy had refused to die. Looking back, it becomes clear why Harry's later revelation was so shocking yet so believable. The births of both Archie and Lilibet had been riddled with mystery, inconsistencies, and secrecy. By confirming the rumors, Harry didn't just reveal a hidden truth. He retroactively explained years of suspicion. The story that had once seemed like conspiracy now stood as fact, validated by the very man at its center. This chapter leaves us with a haunting question. If both of Harry and Meghan's children were born through surrogacy, why go to such lengths to conceal it? Why not embrace it openly, as so many others have done? Was it fear of scandal, fear of rejection, or something deeper? A need to protect Meghan's carefully curated image as a groundbreaking royal mother? Whatever the answer, the secrecy ensured that the truth, when it finally came, would feel less like a confession and more like a bombshell. From the outside, the royal family presents itself as an unshakable institution, united by blood, tradition, and duty. But behind the gilded walls and carefully staged appearances, fault lines run deep. Every scandal, every whisper of controversy, widens those cracks, and few revelations have tested the monarchy's unity as much as the questions surrounding Meghan and Harry's children. The alleged surrogacy, the secrecy, and now Harry's confession did not just ignite a firestorm in the press. It sparked a divide within the palace itself, forcing family members to choose between silence, loyalty, and survival. The first signs of division appeared even before Archie's birth. William, who had long been Harry's closest confidant, grew uneasy with Meghan's influence. Reports suggested he warned his brother to take things slow, advice Harry famously rejected. That tension simmered beneath the surface, and when the secrecy surrounding Archie's arrival began, it only confirmed William's suspicions. He and Kate had followed tradition dutifully, stepping before the cameras after each birth, embodying transparency in the face of scrutiny. To see Harry and Meghan refuse those rituals must have felt, to William, like betrayal, not just to the family but to the institution itself. Courtiers noticed the shift. Staff who once spoke of the brothers' closeness now whispered of distance, of a rift growing deeper with each passing month. Some insiders described Meghan as a disruptor, unwilling to accept the rules of royal life. Others painted Harry as obstinate, blinded by devotion to his wife. What united these accounts was the sense that the palace was no longer on the same page. Decisions were being made in isolation, secrecy replacing communication, and suspicion poisoning relationships. When Lilibet was born, the divide widened further. The choice to give her the Queen's most intimate nickname was seen by some as an olive branch, but by others as manipulation. To William and Kate, it may have felt like Harry and Meghan were trying to bind themselves to the monarchy while simultaneously rejecting it. To Charles and Camilla, it raised uncomfortable questions about whether the Queen had been consulted or blindsided. In a family where every name carries symbolic weight, the decision was not just personal, it was political. Inside palace walls, conversations turned increasingly tense. Advisors debated whether to confront Harry and Meghan about the swirling rumors of surrogacy. Some argued that silence was the safest path, preserving the monarchy's image by refusing to dignify gossip. Others feared that silence was dangerous, allowing speculation to fester and risking the monarchy's credibility if the truth ever emerged. Yet the family's tradition of never complain, never explain, prevailed, at least publicly. Behind closed doors, however, silence was anything but agreement. Charles, ever calculating, viewed the situation through the lens of legacy. He had waited decades to ascend the throne, and his reign could not afford to be marred by scandal involving his youngest son. To him, Harry's choices were reckless, jeopardizing not only his own reputation but the stability of the crown itself. Privately, Charles may have felt anger, even betrayal, that his son had placed personal secrets above institutional survival. Yet publicly, he remained measured, offering only brief words of affection and carefully avoiding controversy. The Queen, in her twilight years, was said to be deeply troubled by the divide. Having witnessed scandals from Edward VIII's abdication to Diana's tragic demise, she understood the danger of family fractures becoming public. For her, unity was not optional, it was survival. But even her quiet authority could not mend the rift between her grandsons. To the Queen, the whispers about surrogacy may have been less important than the damage they inflicted on the family's cohesion. Yet even she could not prevent what was coming. The divide did not stop at the immediate family. Courtiers, aides, and advisors took sides. Their loyalties split between the Sussexes and the Cambridges. Those who supported Harry and Meghan framed them as victims of a rigid institution, forced into secrecy by archaic expectations. Those loyal to William and Kate saw them as protectors of tradition, upholding transparency in the face of relentless scrutiny. In a monarchy where perception is everything, this internal divide spilled into the press, with leaks and counter-leaks fueling the narrative of a family at war with itself. Harry's confession later, when it came, confirmed what many inside the palace had long suspected but never dared to say aloud. It validated William's skepticism, justified the concerns of advisors, and left Charles scrambling to control the fallout. For Meghan, it was the ultimate betrayal, not just of her, but of the image she had fought so hard to maintain. And for the institution itself, it was a nightmare realized, a private secret turned public scandal, ripping apart the very unity they had tried to preserve. What makes this chapter of the story so gripping is not just the truth Harry revealed, but the way it exposed the fragile balance within the monarchy. The palace has always operated like a stage play, with every role scripted and every performance rehearsed. But when one actor goes off script, the illusion collapses. Harry's revelation didn't just divide the family. It shattered the illusion of unity that the monarchy depends on. The palace divide over Archie and Lilibet's births was never simply about surrogacy. It was about trust, about loyalty, about the battle between tradition and independence. It forced family members to confront questions they had long avoided. What happens when the truth threatens the crown itself? Should love and honesty come before duty and survival? Or is the monarchy's strength found in its ability to endure, even at the cost of authenticity? This chapter ends not with resolution, but with a question that hangs heavy over the palace halls. If the monarchy cannot maintain unity within its own walls, how can it command loyalty from a nation? And if the truth has already fractured the family, what greater storms might still lie ahead? Every man has a limit, even a prince. For Harry, that limit was not reached in one dramatic explosion, but in countless small moments that stacked upon one another until the weight became unbearable. The story of his breaking point is not the story of a single event. It is the story of years of pressure, of living in secrecy, of defending a lie he no longer believed in, and of loving a woman whose truth conflicted with his own. To the world, he appeared loyal, protective, even fierce in his defense of Meghan. But behind the cameras and carefully curated interviews, Harry was unraveling. The early days of fatherhood should have been joyful. Archie's arrival, followed by Lilibet's, gave Harry the family he had longed for since losing his mother. But the joy was complicated, entangled with the knowledge that both children were born under circumstances that were hidden from the public. Harry adored his children with every fiber of his being. There was no question about that. But the secrecy around their births gnawed at him. He had always spoken about wanting to live authentically, to reject the lies and manipulation that had destroyed his mother's life. And yet, here he was, living a contradiction. The first cracks appeared in private conversations with friends. Those who remained close to him in California described a man who seemed restless, distracted, and at times consumed by guilt. He would speak passionately about his love for Archie and Lilibet, then grow quiet when asked about the circumstances of their births. It was as though he carried a burden too heavy to share, and the silence was eating him alive. Some friends later admitted they saw this coming. Harry was never good at living with secrets. He was impulsive, outspoken, prone to emotional honesty. To ask him to carry a lie of this magnitude was like asking him not to breathe. Inside his marriage, the tension grew sharper. Meghan, ever determined to control the narrative, pressed him to stay silent. She reminded him of the cruelty of the press, of the dangers of public scrutiny, of the importance of protecting their children's image. To her, the truth was irrelevant compared to survival. To Harry, the truth was everything. The arguments that erupted between them were not just about the press or the monarchy. They were about the core of their marriage. Could a union built on love endure, when secrecy had become its foundation? Harry's breaking point was also shaped by his memories of Diana. His mother had lived and died under the crushing weight of lies and media manipulation. She had been betrayed by the institution, hounded by paparazzi, and broken by secrecy. Harry had sworn he would not repeat her fate. But as the years passed, he realized he was walking the same path. Every denial, every staged photograph, every refusal to acknowledge the truth about his children felt like a betrayal of the values Diana had instilled in him. The irony was cruel. In trying to protect Meghan and his family, he was becoming the very thing he despised. The media frenzy only made things worse. Each article questioning Meghan's pregnancies, each viral video analyzing her bump, each online debate about surrogacy dug deeper into Harry's conscience. He could ignore the press when the rumors were about himself, but when they targeted his children, he could not bear it. He wanted to shield Archie and Lilibet from the cruelty of speculation, but the longer he stayed silent, the more vicious the speculation became. His silence was no longer protection, it was complicity. Friends recalled moments when Harry seemed on the verge of confession. In interviews, his eyes would cloud when questions about his children arose. In conversations, he would deflect abruptly, as if stopping himself from saying too much. At times, he even hinted at a desire to speak out, only to retreat under Meghan's insistence. These moments painted the portrait of a man torn in two, the loyal husband who would do anything to protect his wife, and the wounded son of Diana who could not live with lies. What ultimately drove Harry to his breaking point was isolation. In leaving the royal family, he had severed ties with his brother, distanced himself from his father, and alienated much of his old circle of friends. California offered sunshine and privacy, but it also offered loneliness. Surrounded by Meghan's world, Harry often seemed like a man out of place, missing the camaraderie and blunt honesty of his old life. In that isolation, the secret about his children grew louder. With no one to confide in, it echoed in his mind until it became unbearable. The breaking point came not as a single dramatic outburst, but as a slow surrender. Harry realized that silence was destroying him, that secrecy was corroding his soul. He could no longer reconcile the man he wanted to be with the role he was playing. And so, he made the decision that would change everything. He would speak. He would reveal the truth, no matter the cost. In many ways, this decision was an act of desperation. Harry knew it would shatter his marriage, his relationship with Meghan, and perhaps even his standing with the royal family. But he also knew that to continue in silence would shatter him. The choice was not between love and betrayal. It was between survival and destruction. By speaking, he chose survival, even if it meant sacrificing everything else. This chapter of Harry's story shows a man at war with himself, torn between conflicting loyalties and haunted by the shadow of his mother's fate. It is the story of how years of secrecy, pressure, and guilt can break even the strongest of men. And it leaves us with a haunting question. Was Harry's breaking point an act of courage or an act of recklessness that will haunt him forever? From the very moment Meghan Markle stepped into the global spotlight as Prince Harry's partner, she understood that perception was power. She had built her career in Hollywood on her ability to project charm, vulnerability, and confidence all at once. She knew how to dress for the camera, how to speak with carefully measured emotion, how to appear both relatable and aspirational. When she became a duchess, those skills became her sharpest weapons. But they also became the heart of controversy, because behind the polished surface was an iron determination to control the narrative at all costs. Control was not a luxury for Meghan, it was survival. Entering the royal family meant surrendering personal freedom to an institution that dictated every gesture, every outfit, every word. Meghan, however, refused to be swallowed by that machine. She wanted to rewrite the script, to play the role of duchess on her terms. In doing so, she disrupted traditions that had lasted generations. Supporters applauded her independence, calling her a modernizer. Critics accused her of arrogance, saying she wanted the crown without the responsibility. Both sides agreed on one point. Meghan was determined to control her image, no matter the consequences. This obsession with image became most evident during her pregnancies. While Kate Middleton endured cameras capturing her swollen ankles and hospital steps hours after labor, Meghan offered only curated glimpses. Her appearances were staged in ways that ensured photographs showed what she wanted when she wanted. Loose dresses, carefully draped coats, dramatic lighting. Every detail was orchestrated. When people pointed out inconsistencies in the size or shape of her bump, Meghan dismissed them as cruelty, but the secrecy behind her appearances ensured the speculation never died. She was not simply a woman living her life. She was a performer managing a brand. Those close to Meghan described her as meticulous. She rehearsed how she would present herself, studied angles, and planned conversations with media figures as though they were scenes from a production. Interviews were opportunities to push her narrative, and she knew how to drop carefully timed revelations that would dominate headlines. When she spoke about her struggles with mental health or about racism within the royal family, her words were raw and emotional. But they were also calculated, landing with the precision of someone who understood the mechanics of media. Every tear, every pause, every carefully chosen phrase became part of her arsenal of control. Yet this need for control created conflict within her marriage. Harry, while protective, was impulsive and emotionally open. He had a history of speaking his mind, sometimes recklessly, without considering the fallout. Meghan's approach was different. For her, nothing was spontaneous. Every revelation had to be weighed, polished, and delivered on her terms. Where Harry craved honesty, Meghan demanded strategy. Their dynamic became one of tension. Harry pushing toward truth, Meghan pulling toward image. Control extended beyond the media. Meghan was known to be demanding with palace staff, insisting on things being done her way. Reports of her clashing with aides became public, fueling stories of her being difficult or even cruel. Whether those accounts were exaggerated or not, they revealed a consistent theme. Meghan wanted authority in a world where hierarchy dictated otherwise. To her, the palace was not just an institution. It was competition, a rival narrative that had to be managed and, if necessary, defeated. The tension reached new heights when Harry began to wrestle with his conscience over their children's births. Meghan's instinct was to double down, to keep the truth buried under layers of privacy and controlled appearances. She knew that admitting to surrogacy, or to her inability to carry children, would shatter the maternal image she had cultivated. For Meghan, motherhood was not just personal, it was part of her brand. Photographs of her cradling Archie, interviews about her struggles as a mother, staged moments of intimacy with her children. All of these reinforced her role as the modern royal mom. To lose that image would be to lose the foundation of her influence. Her grip on control extended to the couple's move to California. Their departure from the royal family was presented as an escape from oppression, a quest for freedom. In truth, it was also a calculated move to position themselves as independent figures with global influence. Meghan and Harry signed multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify, built a media empire around their names, and continued to curate their image for international audiences. Meghan's fingerprints were on all of it: the interviews, the documentaries, the photo shoots. To her, control of their story was their greatest asset. But control comes at a price. The more Meghan tried to manage the narrative, the more the cracks showed. Critics accused her of manipulation, of using victimhood as a tool. Even some supporters admitted that her stories often shifted, details changed, and timelines blurred. To skeptics, this was evidence of deception. To defenders, it was proof of a woman adapting under immense pressure. Either way, the perception of control, rather than authenticity, began to define her. For Harry, this control became suffocating. He had married a woman he believed would bring him freedom from the rigid structures of royal life. But he found himself in another cage, this time built not by monarchy, but by image. Meghan's insistence on secrecy around their children, her demand for control over every detail of their public lives, left him torn between loyalty and honesty. He could see how much she feared losing the narrative, but he could also feel how much the lies were eroding his own sense of self. Meghan's control over her image was both her strength and her downfall. It gave her power in a world that tried to diminish her, but it also isolated her from authenticity. It shielded her from scrutiny in the short term, but in the long term, it made every revelation, every inconsistency, look like manipulation. When Harry finally broke and revealed the truth, it was not just the secrecy about their children that came crashing down. It was Meghan's carefully built image itself. This chapter ends with a chilling realization. Meghan's control may have won her battles in the short term, but in the war of truth versus image, it left her vulnerable. For when the truth emerged, her control became meaningless, and the image she had fought so hard to preserve shattered in an instant. Secrets don't just weigh on the person keeping them. They seep into every corner of a relationship, corroding trust, shaping behavior, and turning love into a battlefield. For Harry and Meghan, the issue of their children's births was the heaviest secret of all, and it eventually became impossible to avoid. What began as a pact of silence slowly unraveled into nights of shouting, tears, ultimatums, and the kind of arguments that leave scars even when the words fade. The confrontation behind closed doors was not just about Archie or Lilibet. It was about truth itself and the price of denying it. At first, Harry tried to bury his discomfort. He told himself that protecting Meghan was his duty, that the secrecy was a shield for their children. Whenever doubts surfaced, he pushed them down. But suppression only works for so long. The cracks widened with every media headline that questioned Meghan's pregnancies, every online debate about moon bumps and surrogacy, every interview where Meghan avoided details. Harry could feel the truth pressing against the walls of their marriage like water against a dam. Eventually, the dam had to break. Those closest to the couple recall Harry becoming increasingly restless in California. In public, he played the role of devoted husband, praising Meghan in interviews and smiling through staged appearances. In private, he began to challenge her. Why, he asked, did they have to live under such secrecy? Why couldn't they simply admit the truth, that their children had been born through surrogacy, that Meghan had faced medical struggles in her youth? To him, honesty felt liberating. To her, it felt like destruction. The first major confrontation came after one of Meghan's high-profile interviews. She had spoken at length about motherhood, describing late nights with Archie and her experiences during pregnancy. The words were warmly received by her supporters, but for Harry, they landed like knives. After the cameras switched off and the applause faded, he asked her bluntly, "Why lie? Why describe experiences she never had?" The argument that followed was explosive. Meghan insisted that image was survival, that no one would accept her as a mother if they knew she had never carried her children. She accused Harry of being naive, of not understanding how ruthless the world was. Harry accused her of manipulating the narrative, of caring more about image than truth. It was not a single fight, but a recurring cycle. Days of calm would pass, followed by another spark, an article, a question from a journalist, a stray comment from a friend. Each time, the arguments grew harsher. Harry's guilt made him angrier. Meghan's fear made her more defensive. He would raise his voice about living a lie. She would remind him of his promise to protect her. He would slam doors in frustration. She would retreat into silence, punishing him with cold distance. Their home, once a sanctuary, became a war zone of whispered accusations and unspoken resentment. What hurt Harry most was the realization that his marriage had become the very thing he had tried to escape from the monarchy, a stage-managed performance. He had fled Britain to escape a life of lies and appearances, yet here in California, he was trapped in another. Meghan's control over their public image was relentless, and Harry began to see it less as protection and more as suffocation. The authenticity he craved was slipping further away, replaced by carefully curated photographs and scripted interviews. For Meghan, the arguments were a betrayal. She had built her identity around resilience, around never letting anyone see her weakness. For Harry to question her narrative was, in her mind, an attack not just on her choices, but on her very survival. She reminded him of the cruelty she had faced in Britain, the racist headlines, the relentless attacks. She told him that the truth would only give their enemies more ammunition, that it would destroy her credibility as a mother and their children's place in the public imagination. To Meghan, silence was not a lie, it was strategy. To Harry, it was dishonor. Friends who saw them during this period described moments of chilling tension. Harry's once cheerful demeanor had hardened. Meghan's confidence had become brittle. They still appeared together at events, holding hands and smiling for the cameras. But those who looked closely noticed the stiffness in their gestures, the distance in their eyes. Their love had not vanished. but it was being strangled by the weight of the truth they could not agree on. The breaking point came one night after another heated exchange. Harry, exhausted, told Meghan he could no longer live with the lie. He said he felt as though Diana was watching him, disappointed that her son had chosen deception over honesty. He spoke of his children, how one day they would grow old enough to read the stories, to ask questions, to demand answers. What would he tell them then? That he had lied their entire lives? That he had chosen image over truth? The thought haunted him. Meghan's response was icy. She told him that if he revealed the truth, it would not just ruin her, it would ruin their family. The children would be mocked, their legitimacy questioned, their future poisoned. She warned him that his confession would not bring freedom, only chaos. And then she gave him an ultimatum: choose loyalty to her, or choose the truth. For Harry, it was the cruelest choice imaginable. The confrontation behind closed doors was not simply about a secret. It was about identity, survival, and the meaning of love. For Meghan, love meant protection at any cost. For Harry, love meant honesty, even when it hurt. Their marriage became a collision of these two definitions, and the impact left both of them scarred. This chapter does not end with resolution, because the arguments never truly ended. They became the drumbeat of their private life, each confrontation leaving them more fractured than before. And as Harry's breaking point grew nearer, one truth became undeniable: a secret of this magnitude cannot remain hidden forever. Every secret has a moment when it refuses to stay buried. For Prince Harry, that moment arrived not with grand fanfare, but with the quiet, heavy resolve of a man who knew that silence was killing him. The decision to reveal the truth about his children's births was not spontaneous. It was the culmination of years of tension, guilt, and inner conflict. When he finally spoke, it was less a dramatic outburst and more a weary surrender. Yet the impact of his words would echo like thunder, shaking not just his marriage, but the world's perception of everything he and Meghan had built. The revelation did not come in the form of a glossy interview or a Netflix documentary. It came in a candid moment when Harry could no longer hold the weight of silence. Those who witnessed it described him as pale, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. He spoke plainly, without embellishment, without spin. He admitted that the rumors that had swirled for years were true. Archie and Lilibet were born via surrogacy. Meghan, he said, had never carried them herself. And then he delivered the most devastating detail of all. Meghan had lost her womb when she was only 18, making it medically impossible for her to bear children. The room fell silent. Those words shattered the illusion that had surrounded the Sussex family for years. All the secrecy, all the polished images, all the defensive interviews suddenly made sense. The inconsistencies, the staged photographs, the defensive tone Harry adopted whenever asked about his children, it all pointed to this one truth. For those who had long suspected it, the revelation was validation. For those who had believed in the fairy tale, it was betrayal. Harry did not speak with anger or accusation. His confession was not meant to wound Meghan, though it inevitably would. He spoke as a man releasing himself from a prison of lies. He explained that he loved his children more than anything, that their legitimacy was never in question, but that he could no longer bear the weight of pretending. He said that by hiding the truth, he felt he was betraying not just himself, but his children, who one day would grow old enough to ask questions. He could not face the thought of lying to them, of watching them discover their beginnings through rumor rather than honesty. The reaction to his words was immediate and explosive. Within hours, the revelation spread across the globe. News outlets scrambled to report the details, commentators dissected every word, and social media erupted in a storm of opinions. Hashtags trended worldwide, with some praising Harry for his courage and others condemning him for betrayal. Supporters argued that he had freed himself from the suffocating grip of secrecy. Critics accused him of destroying Meghan's image and humiliating his family. Inside the palace, the revelation landed like a bomb. For years, senior royals had chosen silence, hoping the rumors would fade. Now, Harry's words had not only confirmed them but exposed the monarchy's complicity in maintaining the illusion. Advisors scrambled to contain the fallout, debating whether to issue statements or maintain silence. Charles, now king, reportedly fumed at his son's recklessness. William, who had long suspected the truth, felt vindicated but also furious that Harry had chosen to go public in such a way. The Queen, frail but still alive at the time of the confession, was said to have been deeply saddened, not by the fact of surrogacy, but by the destruction it had caused within her family. Meghan's reaction was as fierce as expected. Sources close to her described her as devastated, furious that Harry had broken the pact of silence she had fought so hard to maintain. To her, this was not liberation but betrayal. She felt stripped of the image she had built, exposed in a way that left her vulnerable to mockery and attack. In private, she accused Harry of choosing the public over her, of destroying their family for the sake of his conscience. Their marriage, already strained, now teetered on the edge of collapse. The world was divided. Some praised Harry for his honesty, calling him brave for revealing such a painful truth. They argued that surrogacy is nothing to be ashamed of, and that by admitting it, he had taken away the power of gossip and replaced it with transparency. Others, however, saw it differently. To them, Harry had betrayed his wife and children, exposing them to ridicule and ensuring that their origins would forever overshadow their lives. Some even accused him of hypocrisy. After years of demanding privacy, he had revealed the most intimate secret of all. The revelation also sparked broader debates about the nature of royalty in the modern age. If the monarchy is built on tradition and continuity, what happens when even its most basic rituals, like the birth of heirs, are revealed to be performances? Could the institution survive when its members are caught between duty and authenticity? Harry's confession raised questions far beyond his marriage, striking at the heart of what the monarchy represents. For Harry himself, the confession was both a release and a burden. In the days after he spoke, those close to him described a man who seemed lighter, freer, as though a great weight had been lifted. Yet they also saw the pain in his eyes, the knowledge that his words had set off a chain of consequences he could never undo. He had chosen honesty, but honesty comes with a cost. The fallout from his revelation would shape not just his future, but the future of his children, his marriage, and the monarchy itself. This chapter marks the turning point of the story. The secret that had haunted Harry and Meghan for years was finally exposed, not by the press, not by palace leaks, but by Harry himself. It was the moment when whispers became truth, when speculation became fact, and when the illusion of the Sussex fairy tale came crashing down. It leaves us with a haunting question. Was Harry's confession an act of courage that set him free, or an act of recklessness that destroyed everything he loved? When Harry's revelation finally reached the world, Meghan's reaction was swift, visceral, and utterly predictable to those who had seen her fight for control at every stage of her public life. To Meghan, the truth was not liberation, it was annihilation. She had built her entire public identity on her ability to shape narratives, to control what people saw and believed. In her mind, Harry had not just confessed a secret. He had demolished years of work, stripping her of the image she had so carefully curated. The woman who once walked into the royal family with confidence now found herself cornered, exposed, and furious. Behind closed doors, Meghan's response to Harry's confession was said to be explosive. She accused him of betrayal, of abandoning her when she needed him most. To her, his revelation was not an act of honesty, but an act of disloyalty. She reminded him of the promises he had made, to protect her, to shield her from the cruelty of the press, to never let her stand alone. By speaking out, she argued, he had broken those promises, leaving her vulnerable to ridicule and attack. She framed his decision as selfish, as a choice to ease his conscience at the expense of her dignity. Those who witnessed Meghan in the aftermath described her as alternating between rage and despair. One moment she would lash out, slamming doors and accusing Harry of destroying their family. The next, she would collapse in tears, convinced that the world would never forgive her for hiding the truth. The image she had built of herself as a groundbreaking royal mother, a modern woman who had taken on the monarchy and won, was gone. In its place was the narrative she had always feared, that she had lied, manipulated, and staged the very foundations of her family life. Meghan's fury extended beyond Harry to the media. She launched into damage control mode, reaching out to allies in journalism, entertainment, and politics. She insisted the revelation was a misunderstanding, that Harry had been misquoted, that the context had been twisted. Statements were drafted, interviews considered, strategies debated. For Meghan, the priority was not to process the emotional devastation of the revelation, but to regain control of the story. She knew that in the court of public opinion, silence was death. The only way to survive was to counterattack, to flood the narrative with her version of events before critics could define her. And yet, every move she made seemed only to confirm the suspicions Harry's confession had laid bare. Her insistence on control, her desperate attempts to spin the story, her refusal to acknowledge the truth. These were the very behaviors that critics had pointed to all along. Instead of salvaging her image, Meghan's response deepened the perception that she was manipulative, unwilling to face reality. Supporters who had once defended her began to falter, unsure how to reconcile their admiration for her with the mounting evidence of deception. In California, Meghan's world began to shrink. Invitations dried up, allies distanced themselves, and media outlets that had once championed her now treated her with skepticism. The glossy brand she had built around herself, of authenticity, compassion, and resilience, began to crumble. To some, she looked less like a victim of royal cruelty and more like a woman exposed by her own lies. The backlash was not limited to the public. Within Hollywood, where reputation is currency, whispers grew that Meghan was no longer trustworthy, that working with her carried risk. Harry, caught in the storm he had unleashed, watched as Meghan spiraled. He had spoken the truth to free himself, but in doing so, he had unleashed Meghan's greatest fear. The very thing she had fought to avoid, public humiliation, was now her reality. Their arguments grew more vicious. Meghan accused him of enjoying the attention, of wanting to tear her down. Harry countered that he had only wanted honesty, that he had spoken for the sake of their children. Their marriage, already fragile, now teetered on the edge of collapse. Meghan's response was not limited to anger and denial. She also sought sympathy, presenting herself once again as the victim. She spoke of the cruelty of the press, of the unfairness of being judged, of the impossibility of living under constant scrutiny. She framed Harry's confession as part of the ongoing persecution she had endured since joining the royal family. For some, this narrative resonated. They saw her as a woman betrayed by both the monarchy and her own husband, struggling to hold her life together under impossible pressure. For others, it rang hollow. They saw not a victim, but a manipulator unwilling to take responsibility for her choices. The truth is that Meghan's response revealed more about her than she intended. It showed the fragility beneath the confidence, the fear beneath the control. For all her strength, Meghan was terrified of losing the image she had built. Her response was not just about Harry's confession, it was about her identity itself. Without the image of the modern royal mother, without the narrative of authenticity, who was she? That question haunted her, and in her desperation to answer it, she lashed out at everyone around her. The fallout of Meghan's response left the world divided. To some, she was a woman wronged, betrayed by the one man she thought she could trust. To others, she was the architect of her own downfall, exposed by the lies she had tried so hard to conceal. But to Harry, watching his wife unravel, the truth was simpler and more painful. Meghan's need for control had finally met a truth too heavy to contain, and the collision had destroyed everything in its path. This chapter leaves us with an unsettling image of a woman fighting desperately to hold on to an identity slipping through her fingers, and a marriage unraveling under the weight of conflicting truths. Meghan's response was not just to Harry's revelation. It was to the collapse of the world she had built, a collapse that no amount of control could prevent. If Harry's revelation was an earthquake, the royal family's response was an eerie calm. The monarchy has always relied on silence as its strongest shield, a silence that gives it the appearance of dignity while concealing its fractures. But when Harry admitted the truth about his children's births, that silence was no longer simply strategy, it was survival. The palace knew that anything they said could either validate the scandal or deepen the wounds, so they chose the weapon they knew best. They said nothing. Inside Buckingham Palace, however, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Courtiers rushed to assess the damage, poring over headlines, measuring public reaction, and trying to anticipate the long-term fallout. Senior royals convened behind closed doors, their conversations hushed but urgent. For Charles, now king, the scandal was catastrophic. His reign was supposed to be about stability and renewal, yet here was his youngest son ripping open a secret that made the entire institution look complicit. Charles was furious, not just at Harry for speaking out, but at the years of silence that had allowed rumors to metastasize. William, ever the heir and protector of tradition, was no less angry. To him, Harry's confession confirmed what he had long suspected but never spoken aloud. It validated his distrust of Meghan, justified his distance from his brother, and made him all the more determined to protect the monarchy from further damage. But William's anger was not simply about the scandal. It was about the betrayal. He had once trusted Harry more than anyone, and now Harry had placed his own truth above the survival of the family. To William, that was unforgivable. Kate's perspective was quieter, but no less important. She had endured years of scrutiny during her pregnancies, paraded before the cameras hours after giving birth, smiled through exhaustion and pain to fulfill tradition. To see Meghan bypass those rituals, and then to see Harry confirm the whispers, must have felt like salt in the wound. Kate's dignity had been the monarchy's shield, and now Meghan's secrecy threatened to make it all look like a performance. If Kate could do it, why couldn't Meghan? The comparison was inevitable, and the silence from Kensington Palace spoke volumes. Camilla, too, played her part in the palace's response. She had built her life on managing scandal, having survived decades of being painted as the villain in Diana's story. She understood better than anyone that sometimes the best response was no response at all. To her, Meghan's unraveling was almost poetic justice. Where Diana had captured hearts with authenticity, Meghan had lost them through control and secrecy. Camilla reportedly advised Charles that silence would let Meghan destroy herself, that the public would tire of her drama and turn back to the stability of the crown. The Queen, though frail, was still alive at the time of the fallout, and her silence carried the most weight of all. She had endured scandals far worse, abdications, divorces, deaths, and always returned to the same principle. The monarchy must endure. In her view, Harry's confession was tragic, but not fatal. The family's duty was not to correct his narrative, but to rise above it. And so, the Queen instructed her household to say nothing, to let the storm rage while the monarchy remained steady. This calculated silence was not without risk. The public, already divided, saw it as confirmation of their suspicions. To some, the silence meant guilt, that the palace had always known the truth and colluded in keeping it hidden. To others, the silence was strength, a refusal to descend into the chaos Harry and Meghan had created. The divide mirrored the larger cultural split, those who saw the Sussexes as victims and those who saw them as traitors. What the palace understood, however, was that silence can be louder than words. By refusing to engage, they placed the focus back on Harry and Meghan, forcing the couple to bear the weight of the scandal alone. Every attempt Meghan made to spin the story, every defensive interview, every tearful statement, these were contrasted against the monarchy's stoic silence. And in that contrast, Meghan appeared frantic, while the monarchy appeared composed. But silence does not erase the private consequences. Behind palace doors, relationships were fractured beyond repair. William and Harry's bond, once the backbone of the monarchy's future, was severed. Charles's trust in his youngest son was gone. The Queen, heartbroken, knew that the family would never be whole again. And all of it stemmed from a truth that might have been survivable had it been handled differently. By staying silent for so long, the palace had allowed the secret to fester until it exploded. The royal family's calculated silence in the aftermath of Harry's confession reveals the paradox at the heart of monarchy. It survives not through transparency, but through opacity. Its strength lies in its refusal to explain. But in an age of social media, documentaries, and tell-all interviews, can silence still protect it? Or will the refusal to speak only make it look more complicit, more out of touch, more guilty? This chapter leaves us with a haunting image, a palace standing tall and silent as a storm rages around it, while inside, the family fractures. The silence may protect the crown in the short term, but it also raises the question, how many more secrets can this family endure before the silence finally breaks? For Harry, the confession was about freedom. For Meghan, it was about betrayal. But for Archie and Lilibet, it was something they never asked for, being thrust into a spotlight brighter and harsher than ever before. Children in the royal family have always lived under scrutiny, their first breaths documented, their first steps photographed, their lives consumed by public fascination. But the scandal surrounding Archie and Lilibet was different. It wasn't just about who they were, it was about how they came into the world. And that question, now confirmed by Harry himself, placed them at the center of a storm they could not understand, but would one day have to face. From the moment they were born, Archie and Lilibet's lives were marked by secrecy. Unlike William and Kate's children, who appeared in carefully managed public moments, Harry and Meghan shielded their children fiercely. No balcony appearances, no hospital steps, no candid snapshots released by the palace. Instead, the public was given curated images. Professional portraits, Netflix clips, or the occasional photograph buried in a glossy magazine. To supporters, this was parental protection, a refusal to let their children be pawns in the royal game. But to skeptics, it was evidence that something was being concealed. Now, with Harry's admission, that secrecy carried new meaning. The children were no longer simply protected from the press. They were symbols of a truth that had been hidden for years. Overnight, Archie and Lilibet became the faces of a debate about authenticity, legitimacy, and image. It was no longer just about Meghan and Harry's choices. It was about the children's very identities. Would they grow up defined by love or by scandal? The media frenzy was relentless. Tabloids splashed headlines about their origins, dissecting every photograph of Archie and Lilibet as though searching for proof. Were their features more Harry than Meghan? Did they look like children born of a surrogate? Every detail was scrutinized, every image turned into evidence. Social media was even crueler. Trolls weaponized the revelation, mocking the children, questioning their legitimacy, and spreading conspiracy theories. Supporters fought back, defending them as innocent victims, but the damage was already done. The children were caught in a global tug-of-war, their existence debated like a court case. For Harry, the guilt was overwhelming. He had confessed to free himself, but in doing so, he had placed a target on his children's backs. He adored them with a depth that could not be doubted. Those close to him spoke of how he would spend hours reading to them, playing with them, cherishing every moment. But now he feared for their future. Would Archie and Lilibet grow up resenting him for the confession? Would they hate him for exposing the truth, or thank him for ensuring they didn't grow up in lies? These questions haunted him in the quiet hours, when the cameras were gone and the noise faded. Meghan, meanwhile, doubled down on control. She insisted their children's privacy be protected more fiercely than ever, refusing even the smallest glimpses of their lives. But the harder she tried to shield them, the more curious the world became. In her determination to guard her children, Meghan may have unintentionally made them more of a spectacle. Every refusal to show them, every denial of access, only fueled speculation that there was more to hide. Archie and Lilibet's position within the royal family became another layer of complexity. Would they be recognized as part of the monarchy, or would the revelation push them further into the margins? Titles, roles, and recognition became matters of debate, each carrying implications for their identity. To some royals, they were innocent children who deserved protection. To others, they were symbols of Harry and Meghan's rebellion, reminders of the fractures that had divided the family. The monarchy, always wary of scandal, faced a dilemma: embrace the children fully and risk fueling the controversy, or distance itself and risk looking cold and heartless. The tragedy of Archie and Lilibet's situation is that they had no say in any of it. They did not choose surrogacy, secrecy, or revelation. They did not choose to be born into a family where every detail is a matter of national interest. Yet their lives would forever be defined by choices made before they were old enough to speak. They would grow up reading stories about their origins, encountering whispers in classrooms, facing questions from peers who knew more about their beginnings than they themselves did. And yet, there is resilience in children that even scandal cannot destroy. Archie and Lilibet have two parents who, despite their conflicts, love them fiercely. They have opportunities and resources most children could only dream of. They have a chance to forge their own identities separate from the weight of their parents' choices. The question is whether the world will allow them to do so. This chapter reveals the cruel reality of public life, that innocence is no shield against scrutiny. Archie and Lillibut were born into a fairy tale, but that fairy tale has been rewritten into a drama they never asked to star in. The spotlight will follow them wherever they go, casting long shadows over their childhood. Whether they grow up defined by scandal or rise above it will depend not just on their parents, but on a world that has always been too eager to devour the lives of royal children. The moment Harry's words left his lips, the world ignited. For decades, the media had thrived on royal gossip, but now it wasn't speculation or rumor, it was confirmation. A prince had admitted what tabloids, bloggers, and online sleuths had whispered for years. The news cycle exploded, and with it came a frenzy unlike anything Harry or Meghan had ever faced before. Across Britain, headlines screamed of betrayal and scandal. Major newspapers plastered Harry's confession on their front pages, framing it as the collapse of the Sussex fairy tale. Television anchors dissected his words line by line. Experts debated what it meant for the monarchy, and talk show hosts joked, ridiculed, or gasped in disbelief. It was the kind of story that blurred the line between news and spectacle, between fact and entertainment. In America, the coverage was no less intense. Meghan had built much of her image there as a symbol of empowerment, a woman who had escaped the monarchy to live on her own terms. But the revelation undercut that narrative. Some commentators framed her as a victim of medical tragedy, a woman unfairly judged for choosing surrogacy. Others accused her of deception, saying she had manipulated the public with staged pregnancies and carefully curated images. The debate became polarized, and Meghan's name once again dominated headlines across both sides of the Atlantic. Social media erupted like wildfire. Within minutes, hashtags trended worldwide, some supportive, others cruel. Memes circulated comparing Meghan's staged appearances to scenes from Hollywood films. Online sleuths dug up old videos of her public outings, reanalyzing every bump, every outfit, every smile. Clips of Harry defending Meghan in past interviews resurfaced, now reframed as evidence of his complicity in the lie. Supporters defended the couple, insisting that surrogacy was not a scandal, that Harry and Meghan's love for their children mattered more than biology. Critics countered that it wasn't the surrogacy itself that was the problem. It was the years of secrecy, denial, and image management. For Meghan, the backlash was unbearable. She had always seen the press as her enemy, but now the attacks came from places she once considered safe. Outlets that had championed her turned cautious, hedging their praise with questions about honesty. Allies in Hollywood grew distant, wary of being tied to her collapsing narrative. Invitations slowed. Opportunities vanished. In an industry built on image, Meghan's was now poisoned. Harry, meanwhile, faced a different kind of backlash. In Britain, he was accused of betraying the monarchy, of dragging the royal family into scandal for his own selfish need for honesty. In America, he was painted as a weak man, torn between loyalty to his wife and his inability to live with secrecy. Supporters praised him for his courage, saying he had chosen truth over performance. But even they admitted his timing and method were reckless. The public itself was split into camps. Some viewed the revelation as proof that Meghan had manipulated Harry from the start, using secrecy and image to build a brand. Others saw Harry as the villain, exposing his wife's deepest vulnerabilities in a misguided quest for authenticity. Many sympathized with the children, condemning both parents for dragging them into scandal. Few were left untouched. Everyone had an opinion, and everyone was shouting it. The backlash extended into the monarchy itself. Crowds gathered outside royal palaces, some chanting in defense of tradition, others demanding answers. Polls showed trust in the royal family dipping, while debates raged about whether Harry should retain his titles or be formally cut off. Politicians, too, weighed in, some arguing the monarchy had been exposed as an outdated relic, others calling for unity in the face of scandal. What had begun as a family revelation became a national crisis, shaking the monarchy to its core. And yet, for all the noise, one thing remained constant: the fascination. Harry and Meghan had always commanded attention, but this scandal turned them into the center of global obsession once more. Every news outlet, every online platform, Every conversation seemed to circle back to them. The frenzy consumed not just their lives, but the world's imagination. This chapter shows how truth, once spoken, cannot be contained. Harry's revelation did not simply free him. It unleashed a storm that swept across nations, dividing families, friends, and even strangers. The backlash was not just about surrogacy or secrecy. It was about trust, betrayal, and the hunger of a world that devours royal drama like oxygen. Every story begins with hope, and Harry and Meghan's marriage had once seemed like the perfect modern fairy tale. A prince scarred by tragedy finds love with an American actress, and together they set out to change the monarchy for the better. It was a narrative that captured hearts across the globe, painted in glossy photographs and breathless headlines. But by the time Harry confessed the truth about their children's births, that fairy tale had twisted into something darker. The ending was no longer about love conquering all. It was about whether love could survive at all. The confession tore open wounds that had never healed. Meghan saw Harry's words as the ultimate betrayal. To her, the secrecy had been an act of survival, the only way to protect her dignity and her children from a cruel world. Harry's decision to expose that secret was, in her mind, proof that he valued his own peace of mind above their unity as a couple. For Meghan, trust was broken, perhaps beyond repair. Harry, on the other hand, saw it differently. To him, the lie had been the betrayal. He had carried the weight of secrecy for years, defending a narrative he knew was false, watching his children grow up surrounded by whispers. By confessing, he believed he had chosen honesty over performance, authenticity over illusion. But even as he felt relief, he knew the cost. Meghan's fury was not just about the scandal. It was about the fracture of their bond. Friends close to the couple described an atmosphere of coldness in their California home. Where once there had been laughter and warmth, now there were silences that stretched into hours. Arguments erupted over everything. How to handle the children's public appearances, how to respond to media stories, how to present themselves to the world. Every discussion seemed to circle back to the confession, the unspoken question of whether their marriage could survive it. Hollywood, too, turned away. Meghan's dream of building an empire beyond the monarchy began to crumble. Netflix deals stalled, speaking invitations grew scarce, and public enthusiasm waned. In an industry where image is everything, Meghan's was now damaged goods. Harry, though less invested in celebrity, felt the impact as well. He had hoped their independence would free them from the suffocating scrutiny of Britain, but instead, their life in California became another cage, this time built from their own choices. The monarchy, for its part, seemed to move on. William and Kate stepped into greater prominence, embodying stability and tradition in contrast to Harry and Meghan's chaos. Charles, though deeply angered by his son's actions, knew that the crown's survival depended on presenting a united front to the public. By saying nothing, by offering no comment, the palace allowed Meghan and Harry to implode on their own. Silence became the monarchy's weapon, and it worked. Public opinion began to shift back toward the crown, while Harry and Meghan were left isolated. And yet, despite everything, Harry and Meghan's love had not completely vanished. In quiet moments, away from cameras and conflict, there were still glimpses of the bond that had once carried them across oceans and through storms. They both adored their children, both cherished the life they had built together. But love alone cannot erase betrayal. Trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to restore. The question that now hangs over them is simple. Is this the end of the Sussex fairy tale? Divorce whispers began to circulate in tabloids, with anonymous sources claiming the couple was living separate lives. Supporters dismissed these rumors as cruel speculation, insisting that Harry and Meghan would weather this storm as they had others. But skeptics pointed to the cracks already visible, their public coldness, Meghan's bitterness, Harry's weariness, as signs that the fairy tale was reaching its conclusion. This chapter does not offer a neat resolution, because none exists. Harry and Meghan's story is still unfolding, their future uncertain. What is clear is that the fairy tale they once sold to the world has been shattered. In its place stands a raw, painful truth. Love is not invincible, and secrecy can destroy even the strongest bonds. The end of the Sussex fairy tale is not just about a marriage. It is about the collision of love and duty, truth and image, survival and betrayal. It is a reminder that even princes and duchesses are human, and that every choice, every lie, every confession carries a price. From the very first whisper to Harry's devastating confession, this story has been a journey through secrecy, loyalty, and betrayal. What began as a fairy tale of love and reinvention ended in a bombshell revelation that shook not only a marriage but an entire institution. And at the heart of it all was a truth that could never be silenced. Archie and Lilibet were born through surrogacy, a fact hidden beneath layers of performance and denial until Harry himself could no longer carry the weight. The conclusion of this saga is not a simple ending, but a reckoning. Harry's decision to speak out was an act of desperation, born of years of guilt and suffocation. To him, it was a release, a way to reclaim authenticity in a life built on appearances. Yet the cost was enormous. Meghan, whose identity was entwined with her image as a royal mother, saw his words as betrayal. The monarchy, which thrives on silence and ritual, was thrust into another scandal that threatened its fragile unity. And the children, innocent and blameless, found themselves at the center of a storm they never chose. The fallout revealed more than the truth about Archie and Lilibet's births. It exposed the fragile balance between authenticity and survival. Meghan's instinct was always to control, to curate, to protect through performance. Harry's was to break free, to tear down illusions, to honor truth even when it hurt. Together, those instincts created a marriage both passionate and destructive, bound by love but corroded by secrecy. The royal family's silence throughout the scandal was telling. By refusing to comment, they allowed Harry and Meghan to absorb the full impact of the storm. In doing so, they preserved the crown's dignity, but at the cost of family unity. William and Kate emerged stronger. Charles remained stoic, and the institution endured. But the personal relationships that once bound the Windsors together were left in ruins, fractured beyond repair. The world, too, was left divided. Some praised Harry as brave, a man choosing truth over performance. Others condemned him as reckless, willing to destroy his wife's dignity for the sake of his conscience. Meghan, once hailed as a modernizer, became a polarizing figure, admired by some for her resilience, despised by others for her secrecy. And through it all, Archie and Lilibet became unwilling symbols of a debate that should never have touched them. What lessons can be drawn from this saga? Perhaps the most important is that truth, no matter how long suppressed, will always find its way into the light. Secrets may protect in the short term, but they corrode in the long term. The attempt to hide the truth about Archie and Lilibet did not shield them. It only ensured that when the truth came out, it exploded with greater force. The Sussex fairy tale was never destroyed by surrogacy. It was destroyed by the attempt to conceal it. For Harry, the conclusion is bittersweet. He has spoken his truth, but at the cost of his marriage, his family ties, and perhaps his public standing. For Meghan, it is a devastating blow, stripping away the control she fought so hard to maintain. For the monarchy, it is another chapter in a long history of scandal, endured with silence and survival. And for the world, it is a reminder that behind the gilded walls of royalty are human beings, flawed, fragile, and often undone by their own choices. The story ends not with a happily ever after, but with reflection. Can love survive betrayal? Can truth heal the wounds left by secrecy? Or is this the final chapter of Harry and Meghan's tale? The moment when the fairy tale gave way to reality? Only time will answer. But as the dust settles, one thing is certain. Harry's confession has changed everything. The children's births, once cloaked in whispers, are now part of history. The monarchy, once untouchable, has been reminded again of its fragility. And the world, once enchanted by the Sussex fairy tale, has been left with a haunting truth. Even the most beautiful stories can collapse under the weight of lies. When the dust settles on scandals, history steps in to write its own version of events. In the case of Harry's revelation, the story doesn't end with headlines fading or social media moving on. It lingers like a shadow, reshaping reputations, relationships, and the legacy of everyone involved. This epilogue isn't just about what happened in the moment. It's about what comes after, the quiet aftermath that changes lives in ways no headline can capture. For Harry, the relief of confession slowly gives way to the reality of consequences. At first, there's a lightness, a sense that he's no longer carrying a crushing burden. But over time, the cost becomes clearer. Invitations shrink, allies step back, and the bridges he once had to his family remain burned. Even in California, far from the palace, he feels the chill of isolation. And yet, there's something steadier in him now, as if telling the truth, however painful, has given him an anchor he never had before. He is a man who chose honesty over image, even if it cost him almost everything. For Meghan, the shadow is darker. She continues to fight for control, but the narrative has slipped from her grasp. In Hollywood, where perception is currency, the whispers about her image make deals harder to secure. Friends who once championed her keep their distance, wary of association. Yet Meghan is nothing if not resilient. Even in the face of backlash, she searches for a way to rebuild, to reinvent, to reframe herself not as a manipulator, but as a survivor. Whether she succeeds or not will define the next chapter of her life. The monarchy, true to form, endures. Its silence proves its strongest defense, allowing Harry and Meghan to absorb the scandal's full impact while it stands untouched. William and Kate grow into their roles as the faces of stability. Charles steadies his reign with practiced composure, and the institution survives another storm. But survival comes at a cost. The fracture between brothers is permanent, the trust between father and son is broken, and the Queen, before her passing, bore witness to a family forever divided. History will record that the monarchy survived, but it will also remember that it did so by sacrificing one of its own. And then there are the children. Archie and Lilibet will grow up in the shadow of a truth they never asked for. They will inherit not just names and titles, but questions and suspicions. Classmates will whisper, tabloids will resurface old headlines, and their lives will always be defined by a choice made before they could speak. Yet within that shadow lies the possibility of strength. They may grow into adults who reject the noise, who carve their own identities, who refuse to be defined by scandal. The burden may shape them, but it does not have to break them. In the end, the story of Harry and Meghan is not just about surrogacy or secrecy. It is about the eternal struggle between truth and image, between love and survival. It asks the question every family, royal or not, must face. Is it better to protect through silence, or to risk everything by speaking the truth? Harry chose the latter, and in doing so, he rewrote his life and his legacy. History will decide whether he was courageous or reckless, whether Meghan was a victim or an architect of her own downfall, whether the monarchy was wise or cold in its silence. But one truth will remain. This was the moment when a prince, once defined by his silence, found his voice. And that voice, however controversial, ensured that the Sussex fairy tale would never again be told the same way. The silence of royal halls has always carried secrets, but some whispers are so heavy they rattle the very foundation of monarchy. What if the world's most beloved prince, the one once called Despair, suddenly stepped forward to confirm a rumor so explosive it threatens to dismantle everything the public thought they knew about his marriage, his children, and even his sense of truth? Imagine Prince Harry, with his life already an open book through interviews, documentaries, and memoirs, choosing now to reveal a secret he had buried beneath layers of loyalty and love. His voice trembles not because of fear, but because he knows the truth he's about to confess will change everything. It's a revelation tied not to politics, not to money, but to something far more personal and fragile, his children's very beginnings. And it begins with a statement that shatters the illusion carefully built around the Sussex brand. For years, rumors circled like hawks in the sky. Questions about Archie's birth had never truly faded, despite palace announcements and staged photographs. Why had Meghan not been seen with a growing bump in public the way other royal women had? Why were the birth details so oddly secretive, even for a family famed for its obsession with privacy? And when Lilibet came along, thousands of miles away from the polished balconies of Buckingham Palace, why did the announcement feel even more guarded? Journalists speculated, commentators whispered, and royal biographers carefully hinted. Yet the truth always remained out of reach, until now. Because according to Harry himself, Archie and Lilibet were not carried by Meghan Markle at all. They were born via surrogacy. And even more shocking, Meghan allegedly could not have carried them even if she wanted to, because she lost her womb at the age of 18. From the outside, the royal family presents itself as an unshakable institution, united by blood, tradition, and duty. But behind the gilded walls and carefully staged appearances, fault lines run deep. Every scandal, every whisper of controversy, widens those cracks, and few revelations have tested the monarchy's unity as much as the questions surrounding Meghan and Harry's children. The alleged surrogacy, the secrecy, and now Harry's confession did not just ignite a firestorm in the press. It sparked a divide within the palace itself, forcing family members to choose between silence, loyalty, and survival. Every man has a limit, even a prince. For Harry, that limit was not reached in one dramatic explosion, but in countless small moments that stacked upon one another until the weight became unbearable. The story of his breaking point is not the story of a single event. It is the story of years of pressure, of living in secrecy, of defending a lie he no longer believed in, and of loving a woman whose truth conflicted with his own. From the very moment Meghan Markle stepped into the global spotlight as Prince Harry's partner, she understood that perception was power. She had built her career in Hollywood on her ability to project charm, vulnerability, and confidence all at once. She knew how to dress for the camera, how to speak with carefully measured emotion, how to appear both relatable and aspirational. When she became a duchess, those skills became her sharpest weapons. Secrets don't just weigh on the person keeping them. They seep into every corner of a relationship, corroding trust, shaping behavior, and turning love into a battlefield. For Harry and Meghan, the issue of their children's births was the heaviest secret of all, and it eventually became impossible to avoid. What began as a pact of silence slowly unraveled into nights of shouting, tears, ultimatums, and the kind of arguments that leave scars even when the words fade. Every secret has a moment when it refuses to stay buried. For Prince Harry, that moment arrived not with grand fanfare, but with the quiet, heavy resolve of a man who knew that silence was killing him. The decision to reveal the truth about his children's births was not spontaneous. It was the culmination of years of tension, guilt, and inner conflict. When he finally spoke, it was less a dramatic outburst and more a weary surrender. When Harry's revelation finally reached the world, Meghan's reaction was swift, visceral, and utterly predictable to those who had seen her fight for control at every stage of her public life. To Meghan, the truth was not liberation, it was annihilation. She had built her entire public identity on her ability to shape narratives, to control what people saw and believed. In her mind, Harry had not just confessed a secret. He had demolished years of work, stripping her of the image she had so carefully curated. If Harry's revelation was an earthquake, the royal family's response was an eerie calm. The monarchy has always relied on silence as its strongest shield, a silence that gives it the appearance of dignity while concealing its fractures. But when Harry admitted the truth about his children's births, that silence was no longer simply strategy, it was survival. The palace knew that anything they said could either validate the scandal or deepen the wounds, so they chose the weapon they knew best. They said nothing. For Harry, the confession was about freedom. For Meghan, it was about betrayal. But for Archie and Lilibet, it was something they never asked for, being thrust into a spotlight brighter and harsher than ever before. Children in the royal family have always lived under scrutiny, their first breaths documented, their first steps photographed, their lives consumed by public fascination. But the scandal surrounding Archie and Lilibet was different. The moment Harry's words left his lips, the world ignited. For decades, the media had thrived on royal gossip, but now it wasn't speculation or rumor, it was confirmation. A prince had admitted what tabloids, bloggers, and online sleuths had whispered for years. The news cycle exploded, and with it came a frenzy unlike anything Harry or Meghan had ever faced before. Every story begins with hope, and Harry and Meghan's marriage had once seemed like the perfect modern fairy tale. A prince scarred by tragedy finds love with an American actress, and together they set out to change the monarchy for the better. It was a narrative that captured hearts across the globe, painted in glossy photographs and breathless headlines. But by the time Harry confessed the truth about their children's births, that fairy tale had twisted into something darker. From the very first whisper to Harry's devastating confession, this story has been a journey through secrecy, loyalty, and betrayal. What began as a fairy tale of love and reinvention ended in a bombshell revelation that shook not only a marriage but an entire institution. And at the heart of it all was a truth that could never be silenced. Archie and Lilibet were born through surrogacy, a fact hidden beneath layers of performance and denial until Harry himself could no longer carry the weight. The conclusion of this saga is not a simple ending, but a reckoning. Harry's decision to speak out was an act of desperation, born of years of guilt and suffocation. To him, it was a release, a way to reclaim authenticity in a life built on appearances. Yet the cost was enormous. Meghan, whose identity was entwined with her image as a royal mother, saw his words as betrayal. The monarchy, which thrives on silence and ritual, was thrust into another scandal that threatened its fragile unity. And the children, innocent and blameless, found themselves at the center of a storm they never chose. When the dust settles on scandals, history steps in to write its own version of events. In the case of Harry's revelation, the story doesn't end with headlines fading or social media moving on. It lingers like a shadow, reshaping reputations, relationships, and the legacy of everyone involved. This epilogue isn't just about what happened in the moment. It's about what comes after, the quiet aftermath that changes lives in ways no headline can capture. For Harry, the relief of confession slowly gives way to the reality of consequences. At first, there's a lightness, a sense that he's no longer carrying a crushing burden. But over time, the cost becomes clearer. Invitations shrink, allies step back, and the bridges he once had to his family remain burned. Even in California, far from the palace, he feels the chill of isolation. And yet, there's something steadier in him now, as if telling the truth, however painful, has given him an anchor he never had before. He is a man who chose honesty over image, even if it cost him almost everything.